tools, there were cobbles, moulded on one side, and that culture, the cobblestone culture of this region, compound tools, have been found at various sites of this region right up to 4,000 years ago. I don't think you'll be able to see all of the dates there, but it's a continuous culture which has lasted until the last few thousand years. And so we've got evidence for the earliest human occupation and the earliest anatomically modern human occupation. Unfortunately, we don't have fossils to prove that those tools 4,000 years ago were made by modern humans. It's likely they were. Now, I started off with the animation of the sinking of the Sunday continent, and here it is again. And this flooding of Sunderland created Ireland and mainland Southeast Asia. It wasn't a gradual rise in sea level, and it wasn't a single rapid one. There were three rapid rises in sea level over the past 15,000 years. The first 14,500 years ago, the second around 11,500 years ago, and the third around 8,000 to 7,000 years ago. And the overall increase in sea level was 120 meters, which is a huge increase, and obviously drowned a lot of land. And we can see the effects of each of the floods. That was the dark blue shows the land loss 14,000 years ago. Before that time, people could walk from Vietnam to all the way to Kuching in a straight line without getting their feet wet. After this time, we've got the beginning of the Gulf of Bangkok, and then 11,500 years ago, more loss of land, and finally the last floods at 8,400 and 7,250 years ago. We see these kind of splitting between Sumatra and the Malay Peninsula and the creation of the Malacca Strait. I first came to Southeast Asia and to Penang in 1973 as a newly registered doctor to work in various mission hospitals around Southeast Asia, but also in Hong Kong. And one of the things I was struck by was the contrast between the cultures which have come into Southeast Asia over the past couple of thousand years, the Indic cultures, Hinduism, Buddhism, Islam, and Christianity in northern Philippines. But underlying these new cultures coming in was a universal, sophisticated maritime and agricultural economy, with people using perishable materials, so we can't find them in the fossil record. For example, this fish trap being made by Iban man in Sarawak. You'll find fish traps just like that all over Southeast Asia. So there's a continuity of this underlying culture which you can find both in mainland Southeast Asia and in island Southeast Asia. Another example, a Balinese double outrigger. Double outriggers are also found in southern Philippines. Outriggers were invented here in this region, and they went out to the Pacific where they became single outriggers in order to point further into the wind. The maritime cultures of the Bajau, the Orang Laut, and all of the peoples of this region networking between islands developed into more modern fishing boats. For instance, the Bugis fishing fleet here in Ujung Pandang in Sulawesi. And here's another example of a fish trap, a static fish trap. Again, you'll find those in the Philippines, in Malaysia, other parts of Indonesia. Another picture of a Bugis fishing vessel. There are widespread stories throughout Southeast Asia of flooding. It's the region of the world which has more stories of flooding than anywhere else. What the reason for that is, we can't be sure. But certainly the stories are very widespread. And in some places, for instance in Sumatra and here in Sulawesi, people appear to be building houses still that look like boats. The Torajas have a story that once we were flooded, we took to the boats and went onto the water, and when we landed, we didn't dare build houses, we stayed in the boat in case the flood came back again. That's the story. The Philippines has also very many myths of rising seas and floods. And that takes me on to the next part of the story, which is a hypothesis which has been around and has become the predominant hypothesis of the origins of Southeast Asian peoples. That is the origins of those peoples from Taiwan via the Philippines into island Southeast Asia. And so here on the right we have Philippine people in traditional dresses up in the highlands, Fubao, and on the left Aboriginal Austronesian speaking people in Taiwan. How did this theory come about? Well, largely it's come about as a result of the distribution of Austronesian languages. And I'm sure that most of you won't be able to see all of the details of the different islands, but this line all the way around encompasses the distribution of Austronesian languages. So it covers the whole of Polynesia, Micronesia, New Zealand, and island Southeast Asia, and even going as far west as Madagascar and Taiwan. And some of the most different Austronesian languages are found in Taiwan, and linguists argue that the roots of Austronesian languages are in Taiwan. And that may well be the case, but the theory then goes on that people from Taiwan learned to grow rice from China, starting in 5,000 or more years ago, and took that rice from Taiwan into the Philippines, and were so successful at growing that rice that they spread into Southeast Asia and replaced what this theory argues were the original people living in the region, the Greek population. And the argument was that this was based on successful rice agriculture. There's not a lot of evidence for that, but for that sort of replacement, certainly not from the fossil record, but it's really more important for these theories to look at the genetic evidence rather than the cultural evidence. In England we speak English, but 700 years ago we're supposed to have been speaking Celtic. Our genes didn't change when the Anglo-Saxons invaded England, and so languages are a dangerous proxy for wholesale migration and replacement of other peoples. My own view is somewhat different from this replacement hypothesis from Taiwan into island Southeast Asia. And that is that I'll reconstruct here, first of all, in red dotted line, the out of Taiwan view, that is the people came out of Taiwan into eastern island Southeast Asia and then out to the Pacific, and then further west to occupy other regions. My view instead is that the bulk, and this isn't excluding any movement from Taiwan, but that the bulk of movement more recently, over the last 25,000 years, into Southeast Asia, island Southeast Asia, and mainland Southeast Asia, has come from the mainland, rather than from Taiwan. And that's what I'll be discussing in this, in the rest of this talk. The people who came down there then moved into eastern Indonesia and then on into the Pacific. So there are these two competing theories. Now, how do I propose to explain which way it is? Well, I'll be using this talk archaeogenetics, which is basically the genetics of the past, and genetic phylogeography, which is using gene trees and their distribution on the map to track the movement of gene lines. So it's the study of the geographic spread of gene lines. And there are three important components in this form of study, phylogeography. The first one is to have a detailed gene tree, which you can lay on the map. And it may not necessarily always be drawn as a tree, it can be drawn as a network, as shown here. Now, most of our genes in the nucleus of our cells, every generation gets shuffled up like a pack of cards. And what's more, it's like a pack of cards with sticky print on them. So some of the print on the cards moves over onto other cards. So that's called recombination. So trying to reconstruct the past, or the card game, from a thoroughly shuffled pack is very difficult. But there are two parts of our genome which don't have that shuffling. They get passed intact from father to son and from mother to all her children. That is the Y chromosome, which doesn't get shuffled as each generation. And that's only held by men. And mitochondrial DNA, which we all have, and it's held in these little batteries, which we find in our cells, which provide the energy for our cells to work. It's mitochondrial DNA, and they have a circular genome, so it's a fairly short one, only 16,500 base pairs, but it doesn't get mixed up with the nucleus of the cell, and so it's passed intact from generation to generation. So it's possible to use that to build a tree. And we can even date the branches of the tree by looking at the diversity of branches, the bushiness of each branch. So and this is a really brief overview of how we do it, but looking here, for instance, at 5 individuals, being sampled, they will all be related. And maybe a family tree which shows how they're related. But to determine how they're related, we need to know something about their genetic differences. And if we do the sequence of the code in the mitochondrial DNA, we can look for those differences. Now, although as I said, the gene is passed on intact from mother to her children, every now and then there are typos in the gene code. And so here, for instance, there's a typo here, which is different from that one. And this is just a very short segment of sequence. And these other coloured typos there. And we use those typos as branch points because they're preserved in each generation. And so once that typo has occurred, it marks that line forever. And so you can actually build a family tree of those mitochondrial DNA types. And that's the same tree shown as a network. In fact, the root of that tree is just there. And we determine where the root is by comparing that that part of the tree with all the other parts of the tree. Now, while it's possible to make these small trees on the back of an envelope with this sort of information, to compare all of the different sequences of all the people in the world into the computer, of course. So, but when one does that, you can actually produce a completely unambiguous tree for the whole human population alive today. And that's what's shown here. And it's color-coded to, and I'll take you through it. This part of the tree or network on the left is coloured in green because it's all in Africa. And the root of the African tree, in fact the root of the whole human tree, is that mitochondrial E in Africa. And that's the roots in Africa. And there's one branch in Africa called L3. This big disc here is the rest of the world, and all of the rest of the world, and it's one twig of L3 in Africa. So all non-Africans belong to one twig of the African tree. Now, knowing that they all belong to one twig of the African tree indicates there was only one exit from Africa. Because if there were several exits, they would be coming from different branches in Africa. So we can be sure that there was only one exit of modern humans from Africa. Now outside Africa, we have L3 here, and that comes out at about 70,000 years, and branches into M, and N, and R. Very quickly, in comparative terms, and those three types spread very rapidly around the rest of the world. And I'll be coming back to these letters, M, N, and R, because we can use them to trace the founding events in different parts of Asia and Europe. I published that tree in 2003, and there were fairly rapidly a lot of other papers coming out saying more or less the same thing. I've chosen a slide from one of these papers because I think it's a rather nice map. But it shows the route that this out of Africa took across the mouth of the Red Sea, past the Gulf, into South Asia, and rather later a side shoot to West Eurasia and Europe. So Europeans are all descended from Iraqis in that concept, or the ancestors of Iraqis. And the third place that's shown in this particular map, this is in 2004, is East Asia, and it's been placed more or less in China. Now you can see in India we've got M, N and R giving rise to various local branches. In Europe and West Eurasia you've only got N and R. M hasn't appeared by that time, and those have got local branches. So we can use these M, N and R founders and their local branches to identify who were the first founders in each of those regions. Unfortunately, this map doesn't have Southeast Asia as one of the target regions, which is wrong because, as you'll see, Southeast Asia's got more founding branches than anywhere else. And we go on. We can use the mitochondria, as I said, we can use the mitochondrial branches, the bushiness of those branches, to date when they founded new regions. So L3 in Africa is dated to 72,000 years ago, with quite a large margin of error, but we're not arguing about that here. In Southwest Asia, N dates to about 72,000 years as well. And in India, R, that's one of those three branches, it dates to around 67,000 years. In Southeast Asia, all these branches, M, N, and R, date to about 60,000 years. If we look at the populations further along the trail, one of the things that's been discussed is that various populations, such as the Andaman Islanders, and the Orangasli, the Melanesian populations, and Australians may be an earlier exit from Africa, because they look so different from everybody else. Well, the tree coming out of Africa shows that is not the case. And I'll come on to discuss that later. But I should say at the moment, at this point, the differences are that it's the other people in the world, apart from these relic populations, who are the ones who changed most. But these people are as closely related to us as we are to anyone else outside Africa. But the date of arrival into Australia is fairly rapid, 50 to 60,000 years ago, from archaeological and genetic evidence. And so people must have moved across the sea fairly quickly, which suggests there were boats around at that time. Now this is another way of displaying the tree outside Africa. And again, we've got these three founding types, M, N, and R. This is from a paper from the Kunming Institute of Zoology, which was written in 2005. The reason I'm showing you this is that it demonstrates the starburst effect. I'm sure everyone's seen the firework displays. A big bomb goes up into the air and then it explodes into lots of small stars. And that's what happens where you have a founding event, where one of these root types, M, N, and R, arrive in India or in Southeast Asia. They give rise to lots of daughter branches, secondary branches. And if you look at those secondary branches, you can identify founders in each region. And we can count those founding branches from the tree, very simply. So if we look at India, South Asia, there are 26 starburst founding branches, 18M and 8R. If we look at West Eurasia and Europe, there's only 7. It's a rather small founding event. If we look at Southeast Asia, at Sunderland, we have 30. And that's the largest amount in any region outside Africa. If we look in Australia and New Guinea, there are 11 of these founding original types. This is 60,000 years ago, which is quite amazing because they didn't have to cross the ocean to get there. When we look at China, on the other hand, there's only 7. And only the same as in West Eurasia. So the northern, most populous regions, in some ways, of the world have the least founding lines, gene lines of mitochondrial DNA. From China, southern China, there were also return migrations down south into the Sunda Shelf. And I'll be discussing how much of that there was later, but this is mainly from southern China. I'm making a rather artificial division between South China and northern mainland Southeast Asia, because that's a modern political boundary. As I'll explain later, it's not an accurate boundary. Southern China is very similar to northern mainland Southeast Asia. Now, to go back to 2001, before I read the book on Out of Africa, I went out to a came out here to West Malaysia, to the Malay Peninsula, to test this hypothesis that whether the Aboriginal populations in the Malay Peninsula derived from a separate migration out of Africa or were part of the same migration that gave rise to everybody else. And I sampled from three main orang asli groups, and my collaborators were Fatima Ismail from UPM and my good friend Ali Taha, who's former director of Antiquities and Museums, sadly died recently. And we had tremendous cooperation from everybody involved and also the participants, the orang asli we met. And we did complete sequencing of their mitochondrial DNA, and lo and behold, all of their mitochondrial DNA types belonged to M, N, or R, which indicates they must have been part of that first and that single exit which arrived here all that time ago. But their types were unique to those groups. They were unique local founding events. Now, going back to this picture with the numbers of founders, we should be able to use these numbers: 30 Sunda founders, 7 East Asian founders, 26 South Asian founders, 11 Australasian founders, to determine what is changed since that initial founding event and today. So what proportion of lines which are found in individual populations in this region come from those initial founders? And that would be truly indigenous 60,000 years ago. And so that this is it's not the only way of looking at this question, but it's a fairly simple way of looking at it. So we looked at the, and for this purpose I've merged all of the orang asli populations which have been studied so far. That's not because I think they're the same, they're all very different, and, but for this purpose of this question, I've merged all those populations. And what we find is that 86% of the lines which we find in the orang asli come from those first founders 60,000 years ago, and 14% are derived from founders in southern China. Mind you, to get to southern China, they had to get through Southeast Asia, so they were originally Southeast Asians. If we break this down into more detail, we can see that some of the Sunda founders have actually come down from northern mainland Southeast Asia, India, China, down into the Malay Peninsula. That's this orange group. Now, I've done the same thing for Malay populations, and these were sampled by a group in USM headed by Professor Zafrudin Zainuddin from all of the states, not from urban areas, from rural areas around the Malay Peninsula and not outside. And what we find there is that 58%, nearly 60% of the lines in the Malay populations, taken as a whole in the Malay Peninsula, have always been here. They're founders, they're original founders. And the 40% are derived from founding East Asian lineages, lines. That means from southern China. They're not from Taiwan, most of these. And 4% come from South Asia, and quite recently. And I'll take a digression on that to look at some archaeology in the local area. This is in Kedah, Bujang Valley, and the red dots there show numerous archaeological sites looking at Indic cultures in the region. But more recently, there's been an extraordinary discovery of an iron foundry, a huge monument, and 2 brick jetties, and a number, I think, even more, discovered by Professor Mokhtar, just here in the audience, and his department. And these sort of news, I'm sure people will have seen them. This is the earliest monumental structure in this part of Southeast Asia, and dates to 400 BC, if I'm correct. Yes, 400 BC. So it is very early, and this is the opening ceremony. But the point I want to make here is that these people were smelting iron, they were mining iron. The local village was actually called Kampong Besi, and the name must have been there a very long time, because people in the village didn't know that this was an iron